longer able to sit on the sidelines and observe or be critical in their thinking about what's going on here and should it be this way? Does it have to be this way? Those aren't the rules. The rules are you don't get a question. Start controlling the thought. When you control the thought, now you can control the behaviors. And you can train people to react to cues and commands that don't sound like cues and commands anymore. And you can now um, energize an entire culture to do what you want them to do. And how do you do that? By continuously making an example of someone, by continuously and without regard to the consequences, doing the things that you know that those people that you're subjugating can't stand. It is so abhorrent to them. They are decent people. They would never consider in their entire life doing that to someone else. But guess what? How do you dominate people? You show them that it's possible and it's a very real and present consequence. So those are the steps for a small group of people to take control of a large group of people without having to even talk to all of them. Make sense?
Hmm.
Look at how the UK conquered the entire freaking world. The sun never rests on the British flag. Remember that?
Hmm.
It never
Yeah.
sets on the British Empire. And how was that little tiny country compared to the whole rest of the world able to do that? They used the steps that I just told you. I also used religion. So it's kind of interesting, if you step back away for and look at how that happened, and also how did the Romans do it? Same way. A handful of Romans. I mean, what did they do? They went out and they converted everybody that they conquered. Now they just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And those people that couldn't understand the language, man, they had to come along. If they wanted their three squares and to not either be, beaten or killed, you play the game, right?
Mhm.
So now we're back in this full fledged, thanks to social media. Thanks to all of the ways that people can reach out and touch someone all over the world through this great media that you and I are having some fun kind of figuring out how it could possibly be used to empower people and make the world a better place. So I've summarized, the whole deal of domination, and it's so much better, in my opinion, for everyone to win, for there not to be any people that are feeling, upset and used and dominated. I don't know how that turns out to be good for people. I don't know how it gets to be good for the people that are doing it.
But it's interesting because the my martial arts teacher used to tell me that the martial arts are like a hammer. It's a tool. You can build a house with it or you can break a skull with it. It's what matters is the intention of the user. And everything you just that what you just described to me, if the intention is to, you know, candles lighting candles, ideas worth sharing that lift everyone up, that same process will work. And it won't be a process of domination. Like I'll give you a simple example. We don't we I've changed, all I do is change language constantly. And it's in response to the fact that people are changing and our understanding, like talking about learning environments. So like for example, a big thing when I started teaching in the 90s was classroom management. And you'd hear that in traditional classrooms, it didn't matter. We don't use that. We made a shift to focused attention. And the idea was instead of trying to manage behavior, we would instead create environments that made it easier for the student to behave in a way that supported the learning environment. And we explained that to everyone. So, and when someone would come in, like, through Quester's Way, I'd get a traditional educator and and if they use that term classroom management, I'd stop them and say, actually, we stopped using that term. We're using this instead, and this is why. And for me, if they didn't like that, they were probably not going to be very successful in my teaching environment, in the learning environment we were developing. So we'd have a conversation about that. And if they were very firm in sustaining that old language because that's what they had and they didn't want us controlling or dominating them, right, by telling them they had to be different, then we just tell them that, this probably isn't the best place for them to work. Now, in a business, you have that ability. In a country that's a little harder, it's harder to just leave if you don't like the way things are going. But, the idea, I think that, you know, a few people shifting paradigms that spread to the many can be a powerful form of leadership, and it's not necessarily a bad thing or out of a sense of control. It's evolution. It's I remember Henry Ford saying, if I'd asked focus groups what they wanted, they would have told me a faster horse. They wouldn't have wanted an automobile because they didn't know what an automobile was. They had no reference base for it. So he had to create an entire new language that would help them understand what that meant, what automobile meant. So it's kind of interesting. I think that, again, now you're back to intention, and and the best way to at least determine that, like, I watch what politicians do. Do they talk about causes and solutions, or do they talk about what the other side is doing? If it's an attack, an insult, or a justification, if it's something that looks like it's to hold for them to stay in power, or for them to get people to vote for them to keep them there, not because they're serving in a way that would benefit people, then that kind of tells you what their intention is. You know, so yeah.
It's perfect. I would like to kind of distinguish something for you, though. There's the language that you use training people in process, okay? Like a process inside of a company.
Mhm.
And a process where it may be new and different. So, any of us that have been in, like, for instance, the tech industry over the last 40 years, every
Mhm.
year is a brand new deal with all sorts of new things. When I first started using microcomputers back in 1983, I bought my first batch of Macintosh computers for a company that I was working for in Sturbridge, Massachusetts. And the neat part of that was now we had all of these computers on people's desks, and they could do things like word processing and spreadsheets and that sort of thing. And then they could print them to an attached printer. And then 2, 3 years later, I mean, things came in batches, like upgrades. And throughout the 1980s and the 1990s, processing power preceded the ability for software coders to to write challenging software that really even came close to what the processing power was. So we would see 4, 5, 6 years. That the XT computer, for example, had a 10-year lifespan with a 10 megabyte hard drive, right? People used XTs for 10 years. Why? Because it was very simple. And the software wasn't challenging the hardware to grow quickly. Well, in the 1990s, we started networking. And then we started with the connection to the internet, first with these things called modems, and dialing into America Online and starting to get into the whole social media thing. You remember? You've got mail. When you dial in and connect to America Online. So every year there was something new in terms of networking computers together, then networking computers together to share servers and services and printers and that sort of thing. Then networking computers together so that you could remotely manage all of that. Then then came virtual machines, so that instead of having a room full of servers, you could have maybe 4 or 5 pieces of equipment that managed 50 or 60 different processes simultaneously with a lot less electricity, a lot more computing power. And all of that got so far out in front of the software that we had to invent social media and Twitter and Facebook. We went through the, MySpace, and all of that sort of thing along the way, which was post AOL. So now, where are we right now? What is the number one thing that people spend their time doing throughout the day? Well, if you have one of these, they think it's a good idea to tell you from week to week what your actual contact time is. It's up 16%, it's down 4%, whatever that is. Is that really interesting to you? No, it's not. But they want you to think, while they're addicting you to a lifestyle and a behavior, that they're being responsible by giving you the phone number for uh, social media anonymous. you know we're letting you know so that you'll be able to gradually see if you're getting worse or getting better, in terms of this is becoming the most important thing in your life. And now, what's the next generation going to look like? It's not enough that we've got all the news tailored to giving us a narrative where we no longer can go and get the facts on a particular story. We're going to hear all the words that are used by people describing what they think happens so that they can get clicks and they can make big salaries. What's going to get even better than that, because Facebook has changed its name to Meta. And the main reason that they're doing that is that they're not satisfied with the experience that people have um, getting out of bed in the morning and immediately reading all of these posts by other people and all of the integrated apps like TikTok and Instagram and all. Everything is designed to keep you there and buying things and getting more information so they can sell your data. It's not good enough. Now we're going to have avatars again. We're going to have these goggles that we put on, and we wake up in the morning and we're already in the virtual world, and we can be in the same room as anybody else on the face of the planet, and this is going to be better. I don't think so, Tim. I think going outside and smelling flowers, taking your shoes off and walking barefoot through the grass, the freshly mowed grass, listening to the wind rustle through the leaves on the trees. Do you notice they're not asking us if we want that? They are training us to demand it.
It's so interesting. Yes, and I think about my grandparents weren't in the trees, they were in a factory, they were in an industrial, stinking oil, nasty, working 12 hours a day. They weren't enjoying nature. They weren't it was just, but they enjoyed nature long enough to commute from the house that they were trying desperately to pay off to the factory where they would desperately make the money they needed to keep paying off the house and the car that were getting them there. An endless loop. And then they retired and maybe enjoyed nature for a few years before they died. So yeah, so again, was it really this rosy golden, so, and I guess, I get the meta, the metaverse and that whole thing. And what if it gives people the ability to have less time working and plugged in and more time with their families and out going on hikes and stuff? What if crime is reduced because rather than stealing money to accumulate stuff, they're getting little gadgets and widgets online, like all the little online game things that they have, and that satisfies that need. So now they're doing whatever they need to do virtually. And maybe some people, just like with everything, I mean, there are people that watch television 8 hours a day. There are people that never watch television. They all have equal access to it. They've just regulated themselves. And some people don't regulate themselves well. And I think that's human, and when it eventually there's some kind of cause and effect, and behaviors change over time. But I wonder, I mean, it's been, studying business books for decades now, and one of the biggest things is how miserable meetings are and how much time is wasted in the office. At one point, I think it was 50% of the day was wasted time.